What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel for another episode of On the Shelf, a show where I like to experiment with different posing and display options for my collection. Now, I look at my display area like a canvas, and one of my favorite things to do with my figures is paint my own picture. So if that's something that you're interested in, stick around because today we are entering the Lokiverse with 9 different display options on the shelf. But before we get started, do us a favor. If you like my content, hit that like button, notification bell, and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get to it. Okay guys, we'll kick it off with display option number 1, and why I came up with the idea for this video. Currently, these are the Lokis in my collection, and unless we get any more from Loki Season 2 and future content that grab my attention, these will remain the figures I have to represent the God of Mischief. So that got me thinking about how I want to display them. Now, for Endgame Loki on the throne here, I have him on what I like to call a set and forget pose, which means I'd be happy to leave him in this pose long term. That's why I got the throne. Ever since I saw this figure and the throne, I knew I wanted to have him sitting on it, holding the Tesseract, looking like a badass. And I recently just received TVA Loki and President Loki, so I thought, perfect timing to make a video documenting how I figure out a set and forget pose for both of these guys to accompany Endgame Loki and create an epic display to honor my fandom of this character. This was the first idea I came up with. I like the dynamic of one character each side of the throne. That will be my structure for each display option, and I'll throw in different accessories throughout to see what works, like the alligator Loki here, which comes with President Loki. He is awesome. So we have TVA Loki holding the flaming sword as if it were a torch he's using to illuminate the way, and President Loki soaking up the applause with 2 different display options in one, with the first being no crown or flame effects and the second being with them. Which do you think works better? Let me know in the comments down below. Moving on to display option number 2, I've gone for 2 simple looking poses here, which is something that I want to talk about. To be fair, most of the poses I've gone for in this showcase are more museum-esque, and that's not because these guys can't pose, they are actually very posable. My process behind this idea is I want to work with the expressions of the head sculpts and both their unique looks, especially President Loki. This sculpt is a 10 out of 10 for me, and something different like this opens up the door for very different types of looks that you can create. We got TVA Loki, hands in his pockets with a slight lean on his back foot, looking off into the distance with Miss Minutes giving him a talking to. To get the appearance of his hands in his pockets, I've removed the hands and pushed the wrist peg into the pocket, and for Miss Minutes I've used some blue tack just to hold her up there. This look for him probably is my preferred look for this figure, but we'll explore the other looks as we go on. Now, taking a look at President Loki, for his pose, I've incorporated the cane that comes with him, and we have him just standing there, resting on the cane with his left hand, and then some slight movement of the right hand to imply he's maybe about to conjure some magic. From this angle here, I think the pose works well. I think the angle makes him look a little more devious, and whilst the pose is quite simple, the expression adds a different meaning to the pose, more so than if I had the TVA sculpt on. Okay guys, display option number 3. I've switched sides and have President Loki on the right side with Miss Minutes and Alligator Loki, then TVA Loki on the left alone. I think whatever final display I settle on, I'll most likely incorporate these accessories as I really quite like them. We have President Loki using the cane accessory again, giving us a bow, and then TVA Loki standing stoic, holding both daggers with a little twist by having him hold one behind his back. I feel like that's a very Loki thing to do. Zooming in on President Loki first, I came up with this pose myself, meaning I was actually practicing this pose myself to see what the foot placement would look like. Sometimes I do that with poses. Trying it myself or trying it yourself can help you think about what parts of the body are moving when attempting a particular movement. This is one of my favorites for him. I think this laughing head sculpt, when put with this movement where you can only see parts of his face, give him almost a maniacal look, and opposed to a stoic face sculpt, this one has a whole different vibe to it. Moving over to TVA Loki, I've again gone for this look with no jacket. The pose is simple, just standing stoic. I've added some flair by playing with how he's holding the daggers, but that's it. I think that's the best type of theme to go for with this figure, as his face sculpt is quite serious, and I can't see him pulling off some of the poses that I'm doing with President Loki. Speaking of the sculpt though, this is also a 10 out of 10 for me. Photography doesn't even do it justice. Okay, let's take a look at display option number 4. This is a strong contender to keep as my final display. I call this my I bring to you display, with President Loki presenting everyone else to us, the audience. All three poses working together to tell a little story on the shelf while also capturing different aspects of Loki's personality. This one could definitely be a set and forget display for a while for me. Zooming in on President Loki, I'm really impressed with how poseable he is. He hit this pose pretty comfortably. For inspiration on this one, I actually found a picture of Will Smith online doing a ta-da type of pose. So I thought with this sculpt, that type of pose would work. Difference is, Will Smith was standing, which I chose to switch up as I wasn't liking how it looked when trying to emulate his stance. For me, having President Loki kneel works much better. Jumping over to TVA Loki now. For his pose, I wanted to have him as if he's on stage with the others, showing us a little magic and Loki flair. As for the pose, this is one that has been done already by many, but I love it, and I thought I'd mix it up by throwing in Mysterio's smoke effects to amplify the theme. What do you guys think? Do you think this one works? Moving on to display option number 5. Very simple museum type poses, but again, for these figures, I think these types of subtle poses really lend themselves to how these guys look. Because they're just standing there, I've enjoyed the challenge of trying to create realistic stances that have many little different tweaks, angles and uneven lines to emulate how we would really stand. I love that the simplicity of it has actually been quite difficult at times to recreate. Looking at TVA Loki first, from here on out I'm experimenting with posing him with his variant jacket on. For this one I'm attempting the straightening his tie pose, which in hindsight I don't know if I hit that well and it isn't really my favourite. The arms can move well enough, but I don't think I did a good enough job of hiding the joints, which I think is necessary for a pose like this. What do you guys think? Would you do something like this? Let me know. Moving over to President Loki. For this one, I wanted to revisit having him looking down to make him look a little more sinister when viewed from front on. To add to the theme, I've got him standing feet together but a little uneven in his stance, which you can tell by how his shoulders sit. I've got him using one of his hands that come close enough to replicating him about to shush us. Then to cap off the look, we have his left hand by his side, conjuring up some magic as if he's hiding it from the other Lokis. Okay guys, let's take a look at display number 6. A little chaos is about to ensue. Looks like someone set off the charge to prune this timeline, which Miss Minutes is trying to bring attention to, but seems our Lokis are preoccupied. For this one, I wanted to bring in a few more accessories, and again, I'm really happy with all of the accessories that come with these guys. There's actually too many to try and use all at once, which for me is a good problem to have. Starting with TVA Loki, I wanted to do a different stance whilst having him pop his collar and interact with his jacket. When you're always doing standing poses, it can get stale if you don't throw in a variety with the lower half of the body. So for this one, I wanted to convey a bit more movement with having him put more weight on his left leg whilst having his right partially off the ground. If trying this for your display, I'd recommend using a stand to help him balance. Moving over to President Loki, I have him in a similar pose to the one he did in the show when he showed up in the lair. Except, for my interpretation, I've made some changes with his stance and angles. A key one being I have his torso crunching to the left side, then I have his head tilting to the right just slightly, and finally with his arms, I have them uneven and not symmetrical on purpose. Taking a look at display option number 7, and for this one, I wanted to experiment with a few different themes including movement and display. I wanted to have both figures moving, and because of this I've brought in both their stands to hold them up safely, and by bringing in the stands it actually gave me the idea to incorporate the background display pieces that come with these guys, to give you an idea of what it can look like when you use them in your display as well. And to be fair, I like it. At the angle I have the camera now, the light is reflecting off them a bit, but in person when you're moving around it, it's not that bad I don't think. What do you guys think? Zooming in on TVA Loki, we have him in a walking pose as if he's just walked through the portal, ready for battle, having both daggers in hand. For this one, I've tried to get his walk and look as natural and unique at the same time as I can, and I did this by manipulating pretty much every part of him to create the angles and express movement. For a pose like this, the angle you have him on and the positioning of his legs are key to selling this look, I think. Jumping over to President Loki, I've brought back his cane for this one as I honestly could have used it for every pose. I absolutely love it. For his look of movement, I have him mid-dance like he's in a musical almost. I think for a pose like this, his unique face sculpt is a big part of what sells this look for me. I imagine him dancing in a menacing way with his cane like this. I took inspiration for this one as well by seeing people dance with either walking canes or umbrellas. That's what I used for it. Moving on to display option number 8, and for this one, I wanted to have both figures facing away from Endgame Loki and each other. It began with my idea for posing President Loki like this, leaning on his cane and almost tipping his hat if you will. And once I had that how I wanted, I then went to work on TVA Loki. As I hadn't used the temp pad yet, I thought it could work in this scene by having him as if he's just walked through the portal and he's having a casual look around. To again mix up another pose where he's just standing there, changing the angle he's facing and having him now with just one hand in his pocket and the temp pad in the other, we don't see any seam lines, which does add a level of realism to the pose which I quite like. For me though, the star of the show has to be President Loki. I have to say, he's been one of my favourite figures in recent memory that I've enjoyed so much trying to come up with different looks for, given his unique look and premise. The majority of his poses I would never have done with other figures. The head sculpt, because it's so different and so good, opened up the door for all these other possibilities. He's such a fun figure. Okay guys, display option number 9, and the final display. I present to you just a couple of Lokis. And for this one, I wanted to have them all interacting with the base together for a family photo. Special shout out to my Iron Legion on this one. This was a scene I worked on in our last members only pose and chill session, and I'm happy to have this as my last display option for these awesome figures. If you'd like to be a part of the Iron Legion, consider taking a look at becoming a channel member. We have a closed Facebook group and do once a month live hangouts where we chat and pose up figures for fun. And that's it guys and girls. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and maybe got some inspiration for your own displays. I thank you all for tuning in, and if you haven't already done so, do us a favor, hit that like button, notification bell and subscribe to the channel. Lastly, we got reviews and unboxings, story theme posing showcases, display tips and tricks plus live streams including the rundown where we deep dive into film and TV. But for now, until next time, I'm out.